Okay, we are live. Well, hello and welcome to Inadvertently Live programming here at the More Freedom Foundation. Today, I committed the cardinal sin of updating Premiere mid-project, and I don't know that my system will be able to function again without a couple hours of work. But it was already going to be an unproduced video this week, so I'm just going to go ahead and deliver what I was going to say on Afghanistan live. This is not going to be the standard live programming with an hour of presentation and an hour of Q&A. That'll probably happen next week. This is going to be done as quickly as I can, so I can move on to other things that I have to do today. There'll be the normal live programming next week. Okay, so Afghanistan. There are a couple things wanted to talk about. Interestingly, one of the things I'm covering today that the Biden administration's recent moves have helped highlight is another reason why I don't really like talking about Afghanistan. So what happened last week is the sort of outlines of the Biden administration's Afghanistan policy were revealed. And what is probably not too surprising to sensible analysts, it looks like we are definitely not going to be leaving Afghanistan in accordance with the deal that Donald Trump made with the Taliban in February of last year. I believe this to be a tragedy, but not really that surprising, a tragedy. So I've talked a lot before about how I don't cover Afghanistan so much because it's so fiendishly complex. If you talk about Afghanistan, you have to talk about Pakistan. If you have to talk about Pakistan, you have to talk about India, and then all of a sudden you're dealing with the policies and the geopolitics affecting 2 billion people, and it's just all a little too complicated. But another reason that I don't cover Afghanistan, similar to the reason that I don't cover North Korea much, is I'm not particularly hopeful for any meaningful change. And the Biden sort of reversal of the Trump peace plan, though they haven't explicitly said they're doing that yet. Let me be clear about that. They've just put together a series of processes that almost guarantee the United States will not be leaving Afghanistan on May 1st as promised. Just sort of underlines just how nothing ever changes in Afghanistan. And I don't want to be too pessimistic. I want to give Biden and co a chance, but I don't think they have a chance of taking us out of Afghanistan. However, let me be clear. Let me start off. We're gonna look at this on two levels. Let me be very clear that later on this year, next year, the year after that, at some point, a bunch of U.S. soldiers are going to die in Afghanistan, or perhaps more likely, the Afghan government that we support, or a bunch of U.S. soldiers are going to commit some atrocity that's big enough, that's larger than the usual run-of-the-mill atrocities. That's a big enough deal that it's going to make international news. That it's going to be terribly embarrassing to the U.S. government. And Tucker Carlson is going to, of Fox News, the famous Fox News anchor Tucker Carlson is going to get on there and he's going to say, look at what Biden did. Trump gave him a pathway to get out of there. We were going to leave. Trump made a deal with the Taliban. This didn't need to be our problem, but Biden made it our problem. Look what Biden did. And you know what? Tucker Carlson is going to be absolutely right. Do not let me, I'm all about giving Biden a chance, giving him, a couple months to actually make, positive way on foreign policy. I am not about apologizing for Biden. The Biden administration was given an incredible opportunity by the Trump administration. They could have left, and anything that happened, they could have just blamed on Trump and the Republicans. But it looks very likely that they're opting not to do that, and I do not want to undermine the condemnation that the Biden administration deserves for this. I don't want to undermine that at all. However, I don't think we would have been leaving under Donald Trump either. I think that the U.S. system has convinced itself that we need to be in Afghanistan, and there aren't enough factors weighing against that. Whereas there are factors in Yemen, Syria, Iraq that do actually weigh against continued, endless U.S. participation there. There are fewer of those factors when it comes to Afghanistan. So, do I believe that Donald Trump sincerely wanted to remove the United States military forces from Afghanistan? Absolutely. I believe that he sincerely wanted to do that, just as I sincerely believe that he wanted to remove U.S. military forces from Syria. In fact, Donald Trump got up there and on at least three separate occasions, at least three occasions where I made videos applauding him for it, he got up there and said, I want to take U.S. troops out of Syria. I am taking U.S. troops out of Syria. Well, you know what? After 4 years of Trump, troops are still in Syria and likely to go up again under the Biden administration. In fact, Donald Trump was really the first person to put non-special forces U.S. boots on the ground into Syria. And whereas in Syria, Yemen, Iraq, we're basically the reason that I think it'll be easier to get U.S. troops out of there when people look at it a little more strongly, and I think is becoming the case in Yemen, where we don't officially have any troops, but we probably have special forces folks. Is the fact is in Syria, Iraq, and Yemen, like we are actively on the side of Al Qaeda and the Islamic State. In fact, the people that Biden bombed, the 22 people that Biden killed in Syria, are a nasty militia that, of course, has most recently been fighting against the Islamic State. We're actively acting as the Islamic State's Air Force or at least Al Qaeda's Air Force in Syria, Iraq, and Yemen. So, there's not a lot of real reason for us to be there, and I think that there's hope of getting us out of those places. Afghanistan is different. Taliban are a legitimately nasty bunch. As a sideline, it's interesting. Apparently, the Taliban fights against the Islamic State, which is kind of an interesting thing. There was a fascinating news story where the U.S. military was actually bombing Islamic State positions on behalf of the Taliban, which is a profoundly weird development. But the folks that the Taliban, the folks that we're fighting against, whereas in Syria and Iraq, we're fighting against established government elements. After we killed Soleimani and the leader of the Popular Mobilization Forces, the Iraqi militia group that saved Iraq from the Islamic State, like the Iraqi government that we put trillions into, was like, get the hell out of here. Like the Iraqi parliament was like, the U.S. needs to leave. In those places, most people want us gone. In Afghanistan, that's not the case. The Taliban, which does control a ton of territory, wants us gone, but the Afghan government that we have paid trillions of dollars to make exists, controls the capital city. There are some parallels between the Houthis and the Taliban. The Taliban have never managed to control the central city of Afghanistan. There is an Afghan government that exists, that we support, and that isn't crazy and horrifying and medieval in the ways that the Taliban is. So I'm not arguing for the U.S. position in Afghanistan. I am not happy is not the term, but I am perfectly willing to sacrifice everything we've built in Afghanistan in the name of just getting us the hell out of there. Getting us the hell out of there would probably lead to a horrific year or two for Afghanistan, but it would also lead to the end of this 4-decade process where it's just constantly destroyed over and over and over again. Much like Vietnam, what needed to happen in Vietnam was for the French and the Americans to finally leave. It was horrific for a couple of years, and now it's actually a nice place to live. So to be clear, I'm not saying that, that we can't abandon the Afghan government. I want to abandon the Afghan government. I want to abandon those folks. But I'm saying that in Afghanistan, there is a more very consciously I don't know if consciously, but very manufactured by the US and its allies, but still very real constituency in Afghanistan that wants the United States there. It's important to be conscious of both things. You can be very aware that there are political reasons why, as we're discussing Afghanistan at this crucial juncture, discussing Afghanistan in the early Biden administration, there's a reason why Business Insider is running these long features on the heroic female influencers of Kabul. Like we can be aware that there's an obvious political reason and political motivation why these features are being showing up on our Twitter and Facebook feeds in these weeks, while also acknowledging that there are heroic female influencers in Afghanistan and their way of life is going to be impossible once the US leaves. I'm fine with that. I don't think there are enough people in Washington, D.C., in US media who are going to be fine with that. I think that there are layers and layers and layers after 20 years of people in media, academia, the nonprofit world, the humanitarian industrial complex, the military industrial complex, the US Congress, certainly the Pentagon and the world of defense contractors that are reliant on this thing in Afghanistan continuing for selfish reasons, consciously or unconsciously, and they've got a lot of great ammunition to use politically, is what I'm saying. This can be much more obviously fraudulent. I believe it was July of last year, there was some kind of defense authorization that was going forward, one of those massive bills that go through the US Congress and people can just attach things to. And at that point, it became a very big deal in US politics that supposedly, according to some defense industry, no, to foreign, what's the word? Some officials say that it's possible that the Russians may be putting up bounties for Afghans to kill US soldiers. It came out in the months after that actually there's no real proof of that. That's just a suspicion that some folks have in the US government, but they can't tell you why they have that or give you any evidence for that suspicion. But it just became sort of accomplished fact. And what that did was, and this gets specifically to why Trump would not have been able to withdraw, there's actually a piece of language in one of those massive defense authorization bills that says that the president, the US president, who's allowed to invade absolutely anywhere he wants to under the current legal dispensation, is not allowed to withdraw troops from Afghanistan. It constrains the president, which is something I wish the Congress would do more, but would constrain him in not letting him invade places. It actually says that the US president is not allowed to take US troops out of Afghanistan unless the Defense Department certifies that levels of violence are low enough. So speaking, I guess, directly to would the Trump administration have been able to get us out of Afghanistan as they had committed to in last February's agreement with the Taliban? And it seems really unlikely to me. You've got, was it Mark Esper, I think, was the Secretary of Defense at that time, who was, I think, had most of his career as a defense industry lobbyist. You had Mike Pompeo, who was a failed defense industry lobbyist and is now went directly from being Trump's Secretary of State to working for the Hudson Institute, which is one of those sort of standard China panic institutes. It's basically an NGO, a bipartisan NGO that's all about taking money from and promoting defense industry interests. So yeah, I think that there were plenty of people in the Trump administration who were going to work to undermine Trump's ability to take people out. Even in the deal itself that was signed before between Trump and the Taliban, something that since the Biden administration completely redid the State Department's website, I had trouble even finding. Even in that deal, there are sort of benchmarks that the Taliban has to meet, and they are pretty sort of up in the air. They're kind of, not too, what's the word I'm looking for? They're not too concrete. And Trump would have, as with the multiple times he wanted to get us out of Syria, a place that would have been a lot easier to leave, he would have been blocked. I think the most recent example is there's Mark Milley, did I get that right? The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, nominally the highest ranked military officer in the United States, became famous for being such a Trumpist that he was willing to dress up in fatigues in sort of battle uniform and march with Trump to the church outside the White House, and one of the most mocked public relations stunts of the Trump presidency. That guy, Mark Milley, is apparently such a rampaging feminist that in a I don't know if it was National Security Council or some other discussion recently, in recent months, it was leaked that Mark Milley, this rampaging Trumpist, was such a serious feminist that cares so much about the women of Afghanistan that he was enraged that anybody would even consider withdrawing. And so these are the people that Trump was dealing with. I mean, those are probably, the Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State, and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff are probably like the three most important figures that Donald Trump would have been relying on to withdraw from Afghanistan and end the one of history's greatest gravy trains for defense industry interests. So yeah, I just don't think it would have happened. Do, 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 do. Okay, so I should actually say, okay, we're already at 16 minutes, it's already getting too long. We should actually talk about what happened last week and why I'm now fairly convinced that the United States is not going to leave Afghanistan on May 1st, as promised. What happened this past week was possibly the Afghan government, but I think this is not. I mean, it's. I think everyone says it's up in the air. We don't know who, but I think probably the U.S. government rather than the Afghan government leaked a letter from Tony Blinken, the new Secretary of State. For those who don't know, the State Department in the U.S. is what we call our foreign ministry. So our Secretary of State is like the U.S. foreign minister. Tony Blinken wrote a letter to Afghan President Ashraf Ghani. This is the president of Kabul, essentially, the president of the Afghan government that we have poured trillions and trillions of dollars into, and controls the capital city of Afghanistan, which is millions of people probably. This letter essentially, it's funny because on Twitter, a lot of folks were selling it as like, oh man, he's really, and I think the way that the US government wanted it to be sold was like, oh wow, look at Blinken. He's really reading Ghani the Riot Act. He's really, putting the screws to this guy and telling him he's got to negotiate with the Taliban or else they're going to pull out. I think that's the way it was sold. But if you actually read the letter, in the 8-page proposed peace agreement between the Taliban and the Afghan government, it becomes very clear that it's actually completely the opposite. Because in this letter and then attached plan, the Biden administration is diving deep into the weeds, is saying, okay, what we need to do is we need to convene under the auspices of the UN. We need to get China, Russia, Pakistan, India, Iran, and the United States, and we're all going to get together and we're going to talk about the future of Afghanistan, and we're going to facilitate things going further. And our really tough thing that we're pointing out, that we're saying to the Afghan president, is he's gotta go to Turkey and meet with the Taliban. And if you're not serious about this, well, then we might even think about leaving. And it's just, I mean, it's such a tissue of fantasy. I think some analysis has said that, all of these things are really good ideas. Like, yeah, like Bush should have done that in his second term, or Obama should have done that. I mean, these are things that made sense about 10, 15 years ago. They're things that make absolutely no sense in the context of a U.S. government that's supposedly pulling out of the country in a little over a month's time. It's just, so what it is there's a little bit of nominal toughness in these letters, and there's a whole hell of a lot of the U.S. is going to get even more involved in Afghanistan in more complicated ways. Just as one example, I initially looked at it and I was like, wow, they can't, convene this mass thing without talking to Iran. That's absurd. I mean, Iran's right there on the border. And then I looked and yeah, in the letter, actually, Iran's going to be convened. Iran's going to be in this big conversation. And then it's like, well, also, but Iran is right now taking the principled stance that it's not going to talk to the U.S. until the U.S. gets back into the JCPOA that Obama was in and Biden promised to get back into. So it's a self-defeating thing. Ashraf Ghani can say has already issued statements and whatnot. Oh yeah, we're super eager to deal with peace stuff, but we have sovereignty, yada yada yada. And yeah, basically nothing. The incredible virtue, the incredible gift, the incredible potential of Trump's deal, not with the Afghan government, but with the Taliban, was basically saying, enough. Like, we tried, we failed, we just want violence to go down enough for us to be able to leave in an orderly fashion. Could you do that for us, guys? And it's debatable whether or not the Taliban has done that. Couldn't find the text, but I definitely, identify the sort of fluid nature of this. I think that casualties for U.S. Soldiers have certainly gone down in Afghanistan in this period, but for Afghan soldiers, for Afghan civilians, I don't think they have. Yeah, it's sort of that was up in the air. That was something that could have been backed off on, but that was but there was the virtue of Trump just saying, we're done, we're enough, we're leaving. That is the exact opposite of what Biden's peace overtures are from the past week. I mean, there is some incredibly marginal progress. Like, look, like, would a Democratic administration have been able to talk to the Taliban without the efforts that Trump made? Probably not. But at this rate, we should be out of Taliban. We should be out of Afghanistan at some point in the 24th century. So yeah, no, I don't think we're leaving May 1st. And I'm beginning to wonder if we're going to leave in my lifetime. I think that the one thing that always for me was like, oh well, we're leaving Afghanistan when we go bankrupt. When we get to the point where we can't spend any more money. Of course, I was going to draft a video saying that about a year ago. And then, of course, we got to March of 2020 when it was revealed that, well, actually, apparently, the period from March 2020 until March 2021 seems to indicate that the United States can spend all the money in the world forever. Without some kind of real debt discipline or something, there's no way that the U.S. is leaving Afghanistan. I would love to be wrong. Love to be wrong about that. But I don't think I am. So I think that's pretty much what I have to say. I'm sorry I wasn't doing this even as an unproduced video. I would have had, a little more notes, a little more this, that, and the other thing. But I needed to get my Tuesday video done, and my Tuesday video is now done. I am still at mom and dad's place, but next week I am moving into an apartment of my very own where I'll be able to set up a studio of my very own, and it's all very exciting. And I hope to be doing well-produced videos at a higher tempo, at least by the end of this month. That's the plan anyway. We'll see if it works out. Mike No-Go Zones left a super chat saying, "I was just in Kabul doing some filming. When I release my episode, I would like to discuss it with you. Regards." Well, that sounds fascinating. And that sounds something else. When I have a studio, maybe I'll be able to go back to doing interviews again. Anyway, thank you all for being here. Next week we'll do the full live chat for sure at some point. Like to do a produced video, but who knows with my move. And that'll be, I'll have the full Q&A and whatnot. But now I think I'm going to take off. Name is Rob Morris. I do live videos every Tuesday. You can follow me at RoboLaw on Twitter or at The Golden Age on Instagram. Y'all are awesome. um, and I'm out.